So I want to push back against this historical analogy that Donald Trump is Hitler. I think it's wrong on a lot of levels. Just personally, yeah, they have some superficial similarities. They both don't drink alcohol. They use scapegoats. They're compelling public speakers. But that's besides the alcohol thing, that's every dictator. So that's not helpful. Just from a personality perspective, Hitler was a very deep thinker, and had a very he was extremely ideological. Obviously, he didn't invent fascism, but he very much identified with it. Now his thoughts were fucking crazy, obviously, but he was a very deep thinker. Thought a lot about history. Thought a lot about his place in history, the German people's places in history. Again, a nut job, but very, very deep thinker. And I shouldn't have to say this, but clearly that doesn't apply to Donald Trump. If you think Donald Trump spends any amount of time thinking about anything that didn't happen, happened more than a day ago, I'm sorry, that's fucking crazy. That's nuts. So, and by the way, that's probably manifesting some positives too. I don't think, Donald Trump has any deep thoughts about murdering millions of people like Hitler did. So that's probably a good thing. So, but anyway, that's not the point. Just comparing these two people, Mary Trump's another historical figure to me. He's also kind of useless because I don't find him he's not that interesting. Hitler was interesting, Stalin was interesting, Mao was interesting. They again had deeply fucked up and thoughts, but they were thinkers, and you kind of find yourself wanting to actually wonder what are they thinking. Trump doesn't, I don't know, I never really catch myself thinking wonder what what he's thinking. He's thinking whatever's gonna is best for me. That's what I want to do, and that's kind of it. That's the end of his analysis. Now, what he's done is extremely interesting and very impressive, but he's not interesting and impressive. That's a big caveat. Napoleon did insanely impressive and interesting things, and was insanely interesting, and he's an interesting figure. Trump is not. He did interesting things. He did impressive things. He himself is not super interesting though. He's an athlete that had a career that was louder than you'd expect. He wasn't bad. He was a pretty good player, but he was just was always kind of making noise off the field or whatever. And so he had kind of a reputation. And then at the end of his career, he kind of hooks up with the right coach, the right team, and just kind of goes off for the last 3 or 4 years. Amazing end of his career. But in general, you're not thinking oh my God, this guy just from day one is has been a grade A talent. It's no, he kind of bumbled his way, and he's in the right place and right time, has the right skills for sure, but not Donald Trump is not the type of guy I think exists or succeeds in any arena at any point in history, no matter what. He was made for this moment. So whatever, good for him, but it's a big difference. So comparing Trump to another person, I think, is really boring, because again, his personality is pretty obvious. Comparing this moment in American history to another moment in world history is very interesting though. But again, it's not Germany in the 30s. It's a really bad analogy. Germany in the 30s, they were under the Weimar government, which was the government that was set up after World War II. It had only been in place for 10 or 12 years, by the time Hitler took power. A lot of instability. The government was very weak. That's not, extremely large segments of the population that were very. Now, the United States today is partisan, but I wouldn't say there's large portions of the country that are extremely deeply super left-wing or super right-wing. I know it seems like that, but I actually don't think that's the case. In Germany, that actually was the case. There were lots of communists, lots of fascists, and it actually wasn't clear which one was going to come on top. If you'd told someone in the late 20s in Germany, you're going to be run by a communist dictatorship, a lot of people would be yeah, that makes sense, sure. So it's not a good analogy. The much better analogy, the much more interesting analogy, is this is the end of the Roman Republic. So Trump is not Hitler, he's Julius Caesar. Now again, probably a little more like similarities between Caesar and Trump. Julius Caesar is probably one of the most like intelligent and like capable people of all time, though. I wouldn't put Trump in that category. They're both very cynical, though. That's actually what's one major similarity between the two of them. But again, I'm not comparing the men necessarily. I'm comparing the moments in history that they kind of like, the roles in history they occupy. And in that case, it's very, very similar. So Julius Caesar sort of takes power in Rome after like probably 50 or 60 or 70 years of kind of decline in the Roman Republic, particularly in the living standards of the common people of Rome. And there had been people that had tried to reform it. They're called the Gracchi brothers. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Gracchi brothers. They tried to, make things better for the common people of Rome. This is in like 100 BC or so. And, the Senate, who was, they were like the guardians of the Republic, but in reality, they're really the guardians of their own power. They're like, no, we can't have this upstart. He's too popular with the people. They set like a mob on him and they killed him. But you had kind of like for decades this building resentment of the Senate. Supposedly they're supposed to be doing things like in the best interest of the people of Rome, but really they're hoarding land and wealth and they're just making their lives better. Does it sound like anyone? Does that sound familiar to anyone? And then you have Caesar, who rightfully like sees these problems and he's like, yeah, like these are issues, and the people are pissed and they're kind of ripe to be like, you know what, let's screw this, because and this is where the similarity is too. At that point, the Roman Republic had been in power for like 400 or 500 years, like a long time. And that was like, there was a state religion of Rome. Like they had, gods and everything, but like their civics was probably like, was their religion also. Like that was sacrosanct. Like the positions they held, the norms, how often we heard about norms over the last 8 years. These were things like the Romans cared about deeply and took it very, very seriously. And we're in a similar boat. America now has one of the longest like running governments in like the world. That's crazy. Like that's a long time. We've had the same form of government for like almost 250 years. And similarly, we take, our norms and the trappings of our government very, very seriously. The Senate, the House, separation of powers, president, etc. Like these things are, again, almost like kind of our national religion. But they're not infallible, and they need to be addressed, because any system over a long period of time will, if it's not changed, will be less less able to deal with the needs of the people effectively, right? Like when you set up like a representative government, the idea is the people make their will known, and then the politicians carry it out. Well, that's increasingly less so today, just as it was around Caesar's time in ancient Rome. And he saw that, and he knew that, and he knew that the Senate was having less and less and less cachet, like civic power over the people. They had like actual power, but in terms of like just like the way people revered them, or at least the fact that like they saw it as a legitimate institution. And that's really that's the similarity here. Trump and Caesar both saw very weak institutions and realized they could push back on them. And then they realized that the majority of people kind of agreed with them. And they're like, yeah, these institutions are kind of fucked up. Like, why should we? And in the Senate, in Rome's case, it was like the Senate, and then in our case, it's like Congress and just kind of like the political establishment overall. they both, in both instances, they were arguing like, no, these are, it's against our norms. We can't do this. We can't do that. We have to, like we are basically the only holders of political legitimacy here. And, this new guy wants to come in and like kind of, tear everything up, and we just can't allow that to happen. But what they didn't realize is they didn't have the power of the people anymore. And that's really the similarity. Now Caesar was basically able to effectively destroy those weak political institutions, and that's what led to the founding of the Roman Empire, where like you still technically had a Senate and you had all these like political positions that like, so it kind of looks like it was still a republic, like a representative government, but it wasn't. Like the emperor had all the power. Well, Trump's obviously trying to do the same now. Does how much he kind of cares about that and how effective he'll be at it, we have no idea. But that's the more interesting comparison. Trump, and again, I'm not saying that they're personally the same, but Trump in this situation that we're living in is Julius Caesar. He's not Hitler. This is obviously, let's hope it's not the end of the American Republic, but, the analogous situation is the end of the Roman Republic here, and we'll see, what happens.